everybody. I don't know about you, but I think car magazines are great. I still have a real fondness for them, even in the digital age. However, there is a little bit of a problem, which is that if you were to believe absolutely everything that every car magazine said and followed their conclusions, all of us would only ever own 3 cars. You'd start off with a Ford Fiesta, then you'd move to a BMW 3 Series of some description, and you'd finish off with a 911. And truth be told, if they were to tell you anything other than those cars were the best, that would likely mean they weren't doing their job properly. After all, those are the things that on paper and in practice do their job the best. They appeal to the sort of people buying that sort of car. However, I am a great believer that variety truly is the spice of life. And with that in mind, last week I drove a Lexus ISF, a great alternative to the default choice for a super saloon, the BMW M3. This week, I'm back with another. It's the Audi RS5, a car that almost certainly never won any group test it ever appeared in. But today, I'm going to be finding out whether there's still a reason you may wish to consider it. And I'm pretty confident I've found some already. Let's go. And now, as we have a clear bit of road, allow me to demonstrate to you just one of the reasons the Audi RS5 is definitely worth your consideration. It has always amazed me that it's Audi, whose very motto is advancement through technology, and who in the early days of turbocharging were real pioneers of forced induction, were also responsible for engines like this, a 4.2 litre naturally aspirated quad-cam V8 that has to be one of the all-time greats. It's a fantastic thing, and even in this car, which carries a fair bit more weight than the equivalent M3 at about 1.8 tons, it's still a mighty power plant. Makes a good noise too, and that's without the assistance of a fancy exhaust setup. In fact, the only thing different about the one here is that it's had a center silencer removed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's give the RS5 a proper introduction. It's a member of the first generation of the A5 family, which landed back in 2007. Those who've watched my previous videos on A5s will know that I am a very big fan, because back in 2008 or so, in the midst of the financial crisis, my dad bought one. It was a brand new 3-litre turbo diesel, and as far as I was concerned, it was the coolest thing ever. The range was later joined by an S5, which, like the S4 of the time, had a naturally aspirated 4.2 litre V8. Then, in 2010, the RS5 arrived with an evolution of the same engine that revved to just over 8,000 RPM and produced 450 PS, or 444 horsepower for us here in Britain. Torque for the initial cars was 317 pound-foot, that's 430 newton-meters. Drive was sent, naturally, to all 4 wheels via Audi's patented Quattro system, which could distribute up to 85% of it to the rear wheels when required. The only gearbox available was a 7-speed S-tronic, which is the Audi version of VW's DSG. Around town, it does a very good impression of a regular torque converter auto. Then, when you're out and about and want to have a bit of fun, it responds really nicely. I would say this is far superior to the first generation of Porsche's PDK, which I know will upset some, but it's true. The original RS5 didn't actually last all that long, because having been introduced in 2010, it was then facelifted along with the rest of the range in 2011. And here's where things get a little bit complicated. I know for sure that there were some cosmetic upgrades made to the car, including a new treatment for the front and the rear. The easiest way to tell a facelift car is in the headlights. The original ones are sort of quite square looking, whereas these have a little sort of cut out of the bottom. And I think it does look all the better for it. Inside, the cars were also revised and gifted a new updated version of Audi's MMI, their equivalent to iDrive. Though never quite as slick as the BMW system, it does still work fairly well, and I have to say, even at over a decade old, the interior of an A5, or here an RS5, is a very, very nice place to be. Sure, it comes in standard issue German car black, but it's all very well put together with physical buttons for just about everything, and I really, really like it. In so very many ways, an interior like this really does show you how wrong many companies, Audi included, have got it with their modern cars, because I struggle to think of many things that a new RS5 would have, which this doesn't. The first generation A5 was eventually discontinued in 2017 and replaced with a model that is currently still in production. There was naturally a second version of the RS5, however, unfortunately, that glorious V8 was replaced with a 2.9 litre bi-turbo V6, which is in of itself a perfectly fine engine, but honestly, I've experienced it and it's just not exciting. But I'm not here to talk about the new car, instead you want to know about this, the old one. Today's example has been brought to me by its very kind owner Adam, who is just 23, and I'm sure you're currently all thinking, how on earth does a 23-year-old afford a car like this? Well, let me tell you a few things. First off, it replaced a Seat Leon Cupra, which he'd been enjoying and was modifying, but got to that point where he realised that any further modifications were just going to be ultimately a waste of money. He does quite a few miles, both for work and pleasure, so wanted something that was going to be able to do the big journeys, but was also a little bit special for the weekends when he wants to take it out. He decided he wanted something with a nice big proper V8 and originally went looking for a Mercedes CL63. In that process, he happened upon these, and like me, was shocked to find just how cheap they had become. You can pick up a pre-facelift one of these for as little, if you're brave, as £12,000 and a bit. But find just a few grand more. In fact, currently there is one for sale at the moment at £15,000, and you could get yourself into a facelift car such as this. Meaning getting himself out of the Seat Leon, which is a very fine car, and into this gorgeous slice of German Executive Express cost him only another £4,000. And it is lovely. And they're also ruddy quick. I gotta say, as far as I'm concerned, this engine and gearbox combo worth the price of admission on their own. But I know what you're thinking. Okay, sure, the car's cheap to buy, but it won't be cheap to run. And for a 23-year-old, it definitely won't be cheap to insure. Well, that's where I was even more surprised, because as a 23-year-old, this car cost Adam just £1,100 a year. He has no claims, no convictions, but the car actually isn't even standard. By default, these came with Audi's adaptive dampers known as Dynamic Ride Control, DRC. That system is known to have a few issues and on occasion be a little bit fragile. A friend with a previous generation RS4 told me that essentially, at some point in time, each of the dampers will go, and when they do, it's the thick end of £1,000, especially if you want to get it done at an Audi dealer, meaning over time, to maintain the system can cost you quite a bit. So, the previous owner of this and many others elected instead to just delete it entirely and replace it with a KW coilover setup. Allegedly, this makes the car a little firmer riding, though a little tauter in terms of handling. And I have to say, the combination of those really low-profile tyres on big rims with the lowered suspension, which at the back has, well, no arch gap whatsoever, did make me worry that this car was going to be horrendously crashy. It's not. It's not soft by anyone's metric, but I'm impressed at how well it's coping. There's always an edge of jitter to it, which I'm sure you can see, but generally speaking, it's not that bad. Being KWs, there's also a good chance they're also adjustable to taste. And even the fuel economy is impressive. Again, when you consider the fact it's a 1.8 ton, four-wheel drive, naturally aspirated V8 that likes to rev, you'd expect it to be poor. But it's not. This car was recently taken on a 1,500-mile tour of Scotland, where on the journey up, it achieved close to 34 mpg. which for some context is 4 better than the 2-litre naturally aspirated Toyota RAV4 that I just took up to do essentially the same thing. In general day-to-day usage, the economy of course isn't quite that good, but he's still been getting between say 24 and 27 out of the car, which I think is really very good. Although it's not all sunshine and roses, the RS5 does have a few issues. First of which, as a coupe, you wouldn't expect it to be quite as spacious as the saloon equivalent here, the RS4, but this is really quite tight. For a car that looks so big, rear seat space is fairly limited. 4 adults I think would be able to get into it, but for a short trip, not a long one. I'm not a particularly tall driver. Fans of the channel will know I've got more in the torso than in the leg, and someone even told me that's likely Celtic ancestry, and well, they're correct. My granddad's Irish, so I learn something every day. But in any case, I could get myself behind myself, but I wouldn't be happy with myself about it. The boot actually is a fairly good size, and Adam, as a young chap, doesn't have a family yet, so the limited rear space doesn't really impact him in any way, shape or form. Unfortunately for those on the hunt for a still stylish but slightly more practical car, Audi did make the first generation A5 in 4-door sportback guise, but it was available only as a regular or S variant. The RS was sold purely as a coupe or convertible. It was only in the second generation that the RS gained the sportback body style, meaning if you want your high-revving V8 in a practical shell, it's got to be an RS4 or something from one of the other manufacturers. The shocking thing to me is that really to get yourself into the equivalent generation RS4, you'd really have to be spending a bit more money than this. Not masses, but still a little more, and in my head the 5 has always sat above the 4. No different really, I suppose, to BMW, where a 6 Series now seems to command less than a 5 Series, despite the fact when it was new, it was the other way round. Visibility is okay, the car has the usual parking sensors and the like, got a camera too to help you in tight spaces, but honestly, doesn't feel daunting in any way, shape or form. If you've driven any kind of saloon car, this should be okay. The bonnet is reasonably flat, but you can still see a bit of it to give you some perspective, but compared with, say, many a Mustang or the like, it really doesn't feel that big at all. Now, another big surprise, I would love to be able to tell you that this being an Audi, it has of course been rock solid reliable, but that's actually not true at all. You already know that the suspension has been replaced, but that really isn't a surprise, nor, to be honest, entirely Audi specific. This car is currently on 107,000 miles, and I'd wager there aren't many M3s or C63s out there which have got that far without having some kind of remedial work to suspension or brakes. On that front, by the way, this has wavy discs as standard and carbon fibre ones as an option, but even the regular ones that this car has work pretty well. On track, I'm sure they would eventually fall apart, but so would the rest of the car. Don't take this on track. But what I wasn't expecting Adam to tell me was that this car has actually had a full engine rebuild. It was done some 5,000 miles ago at the sort of 102 mark by RE Performance, and to be honest, they are the place I would take one of these if I needed some serious work done. The cause of the failure? A broken valve spring, which is something that other RS5 owners have experienced, though it remains to me rare enough that it certainly wouldn't put me off buying one. But in good news, though Adam's only had this car for about 3 months or so, he's actually already put 4,000 miles on it, and not only enjoyed them, but also not had any issues, and hopefully that's how it's going to be going forwards. He does have plans to carry out some modifications of his own, but for now, he's really enjoying the car as it is, and I can see entirely why. But I can also see why this car would never do well in a group test with a C63 or a BMW M3. And the reason why? Well, it is simultaneously surprising, unfortunate, and also entirely predictable. It's understeer. I know, it's a typical Audi weakness, or that's what all the magazines will tell you. The fact is, though, that ignoring many early cars where it really was a big problem, most modern-day performance Audis that I've experienced on the road don't actually seem to suffer from it all that much, or by the time that they do, I think even an M3 would be having the same issue, and that's nature's way of telling you, slow down your pillock. But here, even when just having a bit of fun, doing 7/10, you really do begin to feel the weight of that front end. It's surprising too, because this car has newer tyres on the front, PS4Ss, and slightly older Bridgestones on the back, which are still just about okay. They've got plenty of tread on them, but if anything, that really should make it a sharper car at the front end. It's not. And I have to say, I'm also impressed with the steering, which in these facelift cars is electric versus the hydraulic setup of the older ones. I thought it would be a total killjoy, but actually, it's fine. It's not brilliant, it's not amazing, it's not as good as in an M3 or even a Lexus, but it's decent. It gives you that feeling of heft and solidity that you want from a car like this. And though I think it might be a bit harsh to say it entirely knackers the idea of this as a sports car, it does mean it makes a lot more sense if you think of it either as a GT or a German muscle car. And I think it's that suits this the best. I mean, just listen to it. That Quattro all-wheel drive does also mean that when conditions aren't quite so good as they are today, which, to be honest, in about 2 hours they might not be, it's going to have a little bit more stability, a little bit more sureness of foot, and it does mean that for people like Adam, who have it as their daily driver, it's going to be, therefore, a little bit more usable. And let's just take a moment to remind ourselves, that Lexus I was driving the other day, those start at 20 grand. These at 12, with facelifts being 15 or 16. And that's a hell of a lot of car for the money. So on that basis, I have to give it a thumbs up. I like this. Just don't try and track it or compare it with an M3, which I've got no problem with. Anyway, a huge thanks to Adam for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.